So, you think you got a handle on reality? Cute. Ever consider that the grand cosmic architect might be less of a stern patriarch and more of a giggling trickster with a penchant for beautiful chaos? Meet Eris, the Greek goddess of discord, who once tossed a golden apple inscribed "to the most beautiful" into a divine wedding party, just to stir things up a bit. The resulting ruckus, a little squabble called the Trojan War, reshaped the ancient world. A prank, you see, with rather large consequences. This is a story about a modern philosophy, or perhaps a religion, or maybe just an elaborate joke that takes Eris very, very seriously, or not seriously at all, depending on how you look at it. It's a journey into the heart of organized absurdity, a place where nonsense makes a peculiar kind of sense, and where the very foundations of your belief might just get a playful, unnerving nudge. Prepare for Discordianism. A strange ride indeed, where the punchline might just be the universe itself. It all began, as the best and most improbable truths often do, not on a sacred mountain nor in a divinely inspired vision, but in a bowling alley. Yes, a bowling alley, that cathedral of suburban leisure, sometime in the late 1950s, amidst the clatter of pins and the aroma of cheap beer and floor wax. The protagonists of our peculiar origin myth were two young men from East Whittier, California, Gregory Hill and Kerry Thornley. They were, by the standards of the era, certified geeks, a small circle fascinated by the speculative vistas of science fiction, the irreverent satire of Mad Magazine, philosophy, humanism, poetry, and a smorgasbord of unusual beliefs. Imagine them, if you will, huddled in a booth, underage, but perhaps managing to acquire some illicit lubrication for their burgeoning thoughts, discussing the nature of existence. One fateful night in 1957, or perhaps it was the spring of 1959. The chronicles, true to form, are a little hazy. Thornley shared some poetry he'd written, touching on the theme of order eventually, inevitably emerging from chaos. A comforting thought, no doubt, for many. But Hill, it seems, was not many. He laughed. He posited something rather different, something that would become the cornerstone of their future, well, their future something. Hill suggested that this notion of order was merely an illusion, a pattern the human mind desperately projects onto the roiling, infinite, and fundamentally chaotic canvas of reality. The failure to grasp this, he argued, was the central folly of most organized religions, all earnestly seeking an organizing principle in a universe that stubbornly refused to be neatly organized. But the ancient Greeks, Hill pointed out, they were onto something. They had a goddess for this very principle, or lack thereof. Her name was Eris, meaning strife, or in Latin, discordia. If one were to worship a deity truly active in this world, a deity whose handiwork was undeniably, gloriously evident everywhere, then Eris was the only sensible candidate. And so, with the kind of inspired lunacy that changes the world, or at least makes it a lot more interesting, they decided to create a religion around her. They would call it Discordianism. This wasn't happening in a vacuum, of course. The late 1950s and early 1960s in America were a curious pressure cooker. On the surface, you had the Eisenhower placidity, the carefully curated image of happy suburban families, the man in the gray flannel suit, and the woman in the spotless kitchen, all broadcast in reassuring black and white on the flickering television screen that was fast becoming the new household god. But beneath this veneer of prosperity and conformity, a different current was stirring. Teen alienation was finding its voice in films like Rebel Without a Cause and the subversive prose of J.D. Salinger. The Beat generation, with Kerouac, Ginsberg, and Burroughs, was already challenging societal norms, questioning materialism, and seeking alternative modes of consciousness. Movements like Dadaism and Situationism, with their anti-art and anti-establishment provocations, were also part of this intellectual and artistic ferment, sharing a certain philosophical DNA with what Hill and Thornley were cooking up. Discordianism, then, can be seen as another bloom, albeit a particularly thorny and unusual one, from this fertile ground of cultural rebellion, a playful raspberry blown in the face of stultifying order. Hill, initially an atheist, saw this new religion primarily as a satire, a way to poke fun at the earnest absurdities of established faiths. Thornley, after a stint in the Marines, reconnected with Hill in New Orleans, a city that knows a thing or two about embracing the unusual. There, Thornley began writing experimental manuscripts, often critical of the prevailing culture. Meanwhile, Hill would go on to become a computer scientist, working for the Bank of America, a delicious irony for a prophet of chaos. The sacred text of this nascent anti-faith, the Principia Discordia, or How I Found Goddess and What I Did to Her When I Found Her, was first brought into being not through divine revelation etched on stone tablets, but allegedly through the mundane miracle of a Xerox machine, possibly belonging to one Jim Garrison, a name that will echo with a strange resonance later in our tale. The first edition, around 1963 or 1965, depending on which chaotic account you prefer, consisted of a mere 5 photocopied manuscripts. 5 copies. Think about that. Not a grand pronouncement from a global pulpit, but a whisper, a handful of stapled pages passed between friends. This humble origin, this DIY, almost clandestine birth, is itself a beautiful illustration of the Discordian spirit. It's a testament to the idea that profound or profoundly silly insights don't require cathedrals or congregations. They can erupt from the most overlooked corners of culture, from the Xerox machine in the back office, from the late-night conversations of a couple of inspired misfits. It's a micro-demonstration of chaos in action, a tiny seed dropped into the cultural soil with utterly unpredictable and far-reaching growth. The very act of Hill countering Thornley's notion of order emerging from chaos with the assertion that chaos is fundamental wasn't just a friendly debate over bowling alley beers. It was the planting of a philosophical bomb, a radical reevaluation of reality itself, positioning Discordianism as a profound challenge to virtually every system of thought that seeks to tame the wildness of existence. So what exactly is this philosophical bomb that Hill and Thornley, now operating under the rather grand pseudonyms Malaclips the Younger and Lord Omar Khayyam Ravenhurst, had assembled? At its heart lies a cosmic villain, a shadowy antagonist responsible for much of the misery and tedium in the universe. His name is Grayface. According to the Principia Discordia, back in the midst of primordial time, humanity lived in a state of blissful anarchy, laughing and playing with the goddess Eris. But then came Grayface, a joyless, uptight sort, who couldn't stand all the fun. He taught that life was a serious business, full of serious rules and serious consequences. He convinced humanity that order was good, chaos was bad, and that play was a waste of time. This, in Discordia mythology, is the curse of Grayface, the introduction of negativism and the unfortunate belief that some ways of looking at the world are true with a capital T,
while others are false with a capital F. Grayface, then, is more than just a cartoon baddie.
He's a potent symbol for all the psychological and societal forces that demand conformity, that enforce rigid belief systems, and that try to pave over the beautiful, messy chaos of existence with the sterile concrete of absolute order. He personifies that all-too-human lurch towards dogmatism, the fear of ambiguity, the neurotic need to have everything neatly labeled and filed away. By framing this as a curse, Discordianism suggests that this obsession with excessive order isn't our natural state, but an imposed affliction, one that can perhaps be lifted by re-embracing the laughter and creative disruption of Eris. To understand how Grayface operates, we need to look at two fundamental Discordian concepts, the Anoristic principle and the Aristic principle. The Anoristic principle is that of apparent order. It's the human tendency to see patterns, to create structures, to build systems. The Aristic principle, conversely, is that of apparent disorder, the seemingly random, chaotic, and unpredictable aspects of existence. Now, most philosophies and religions pick a side. They champion order and try to banish or explain away disorder. Or, more rarely, they might revel in pure nihilistic chaos. Discordianism, however, pulls a rather clever trick. It suggests that both order and disorder as we perceive them are man-made concepts and are artificial divisions of pure chaos. This pure chaos is a deeper level of reality, a fundamental substrate that is beyond our conceptual grasp, beyond any distinctions we might try to make. As the Principia puts it, with our concept-making apparatus called the brain, we look at reality through the ideas about reality which our cultures give us. The ideas about reality are mistakenly labeled reality.
Real, capital T, true reality, is a level deeper than is the level of concept.
We look at the world, it says, through windows on which have been drawn grids, these grids being our concepts, our philosophies, our belief systems. Different cultures, different people, use different grids. The order we perceive is in the grid, not necessarily in the chaos we're viewing through it. This is the Anoristic principle in action. Disorder, then, is simply information that doesn't fit neatly onto our current grid. But the belief that order is inherently true and disorder is inherently false or wrong, that's the Anoristic illusion. And to say the same of disorder, to believe that chaos is the sole truth, is the Aristic illusion. The point, a rather crucial one, is that truth with a small t is always relative to the grid you're using.
Metaphysical capital T truth,
if it exists at all, is entirely irrelevant to these grids. Reality, in this view, is the original Rorschach, an inkblot onto which we project our meanings, our patterns, our fears, and our desires. This perspective directly challenges the very notion of a single, objective truth, accessible through any one philosophical, religious, or even scientific system. It proposes a kind of radical epistemological pluralism, where the usefulness, beauty, or even the sheer fun of a particular grid might be valid reasons for adopting it while acknowledging that no grid holds a monopoly on truth. Ideological battles, then, are often just squabbles over whose grid is prettier or currently more fashionable. If reality is a Rorschach and our grids are somewhat arbitrary, how do we navigate this? Well, one way is to start noticing the things we're not supposed to notice, the glitches in the matrix, the absurdities that consensus reality tries to paper over. Enter the Fnord. In its earliest Discordian usage, Fnord was just a nonsense word, tossed into text randomly for chaotic effect. But it gained a more specific and more deliciously paranoid connotation through its appearance in
the Illuminatus trilogy,
which we'll get to later. In those books, Fnord is a word subliminally scattered throughout newspapers and magazines. The masses have been conditioned from childhood to react to it with a vague sense of fear and unease, and to immediately stop reading or paying attention whenever they encounter it, without ever consciously recognizing the word itself or understanding why they feel anxious. The Fnords, then, are the things you're not supposed to see, the hidden messages of control, the unacknowledged absurdities lurking just beneath the surface of the official story. The concept of Fnord is a wonderfully playful way to introduce a kind of critical media literacy, an encouragement to develop what Hemingway called a built-in shock-proof crap detector. It's an invitation to look for the Fnords in your own life, in the news, in advertising, in political speeches, those little dissonances that hint that the reality presented to you might not be the whole picture, or even a particularly accurate one. It's about cultivating a state of hyper-awareness, a willingness to question the unquestionable. This all leads to one of the most elegantly perplexing and liberating statements in the Principia Discordia. All statements are true in some sense, false in some sense, meaningless in some sense. Try applying that to your deepest convictions for a week and see what happens. This isn't just a clever bit of wordplay. It's a profound epistemological tool. It's a way of holding all beliefs, all statements about reality, a little more lightly, a little more provisionally. It's an antidote to the curse of Grayface, a way to keep your mental grids flexible and open to revision, a constant reminder that the map is not the territory, and that sometimes the most interesting discoveries are made when you wander off the map entirely. Now let us turn our attention to the fountainhead of all this delightful confusion, the sacred text itself, the Principia Discordia.
or how I found Goddess and what I did to her when I found her.
If you're expecting a weighty tome of systematic theology, meticulously organized and bound in solemn leather, you are, to put it mildly, in for a surprise. The Principia is less a book and more of a happening, a chaotic scrapbook assembled from typewritten pages, doodles, rubber stamp imprints, found images, and handwritten scrawls, all seemingly thrown together with a mischievous disregard for conventional publishing standards. It reads like a transmission from a wonderfully unhinged parallel universe, a place where profound philosophical insights rub shoulders with utter silliness, often in the same sentence. Its subtitle alone, How I Found Goddess and What I Did to Her When I Found Her, signals that this is not your grandmother's holy writ, unless your grandmother was a particularly avant-garde prankster with a deep affection for Eris. The book introduces us to the paratheo anametabistichood of Eris Esoteric, or POEE for short. POEE, we are told, is a tribe of philosophers, theologians, magicians, scientists, artists, clowns, and similar maniacs who are intrigued with Eris, goddess of confusion, and with her doings. The first part of that rather imposing name, paratheo anametabistichood, can apparently be taken to mean equivalent deity, reversing beyond mystique. Though, as the text cheerfully admits, we are not really esoteric. It's just that nobody pays much attention to us. Within its pages, you'll find a bewildering array of material. Creation myths involving Eris and her uptight sister Anoristic, goddess of order or non-being. Parables like the parable of the bitter tea. Philosophical discourses on the nature of order and disorder. And perhaps most famously, the 5 Commandments, also known as the Pentabarf. These are not your typical thou shalt nots. The first 3 establish the supremacy of goddess, the Arisian movement, and the golden apple core. But it's the 4th and 5th that truly capture the Discordian spirit. Commandment 4. A Discordian shall partake of no hot dog buns, for such was the solace of our goddess when she was confronted with the original snub. This, right here, is a masterclass in absurdist pedagogy. By elevating such a mundane and arbitrary dietary restriction to the level of sacred law, it brilliantly parodies the often unquestioned and sometimes equally baffling rules and rituals found in more established religions. It forces you to ask, why no hot dog buns? And by extension, why any of these rules? It's a comedic crowbar designed to pry open the rusty hinges of unthinking obedience. Then comes Commandment 5, the epistemological cherry on top of this chaotic sundae. A Discordian is prohibited of believing what he reads. It is so written. So be it. This is the ultimate self-subverting scripture. It's a sacred text that commands its own disbelief. This isn't just a clever paradox designed to make philosophy students giggle. It's a profound statement about the nature of belief and the authority of texts. It compels the reader into an active, critical engagement rather than passive acceptance. To obey this commandment, you must, in a sense, disobey the literal assertions of the book, thereby short-circuiting the very mechanism of dogmatism that most religious texts try to install. It's a holy book that deprograms you from taking holy books, including itself, too seriously. It's an invitation to think for yourself, always. So, is the Principia Discordia a joke? A serious spiritual text? A work of outsider art? A philosophical manifesto? The answer, as a good Discordian might tell you, is probably yes, no, maybe, and all of a sudden, a fish. Its meaning is slippery, its purpose elusive, deliberately so. It embodies the principle that all statements are true in some sense, false in some sense, meaningless in some sense. Its chaotic structure mirrors its core message. That reality itself is not a neat, linear narrative, but a messy, contradictory, and often hilarious collage. Central to its iconography is the sacred cow, also known as the hodgepodge. At first glance, it resembles the Taoist yin-yang symbol, representing the interplay of opposites. But the Discordian version has its own unique spin. Instead of the simple dots, the sacred cow features a pentagon on one side, symbolizing the Anoristic principle of apparent order, and a golden apple of discordia on the other, symbolizing the Aristic principle of apparent disorder. These two, hodge and podge, order and disorder, are shown as intertwined, interdependent aspects of a larger whole. The Principia claims the sacred cow symbolizes absolutely everything anyone need ever know about absolutely anything, and more. It even symbolizes everything not worth knowing, depicted by the empty space surrounding the hodgepodge. This symbol is more than just a logo. It's a visual koan. Unlike many spiritual symbols that aim for a harmonious resolution or transcendence of duality, The sacred cow explicitly includes and celebrates the golden apple of discord, the very emblem of strife and disruption. It suggests that the tension between order and chaos is not a flaw in the universe to be overcome, but its fundamental, creative, and ongoing process. Illumination, in a Discordian sense, isn't about achieving some static state of perfect peace or pure order, but about recognizing, embracing, and perhaps even learning to dance with the dynamic, unpredictable, and often very wild circus of existence. It's a path that finds wisdom not by escaping the hodgepodge, but by diving right into its swirling, paradoxical heart. Beyond the perplexing profundities of the Principia Discordia, Discordianism offers a range of practices, or perhaps anti-practices, designed to further scramble your reality grids and awaken you to the inherent strangeness of it all. These are less about solemn ritual and more about interactive, reality-bending games. Prime among these is the infamous Law of Fives. The Law of Fives, as revealed to good Lord Omar and promulgated by the paratheo-anametabistic of Eris Esoteric, states with unwavering certainty, all things happen in fives, or are divisible by, or are multiples of 5, or are somehow directly or indirectly appropriate to 5. And the kicker? The Law of Fives is never wrong. Accompanying this is an equally compelling observation from an old memo from Omar to Malaclips the Younger. I find the Law of Fives to be more and more manifest the harder I look. Now, the astute listener, the one whose brain hasn't completely turned to Fnord-flavored jelly yet, might detect a whiff of something familiar here. Something that sounds suspiciously like confirmation bias. And you'd be absolutely right. If you go looking for 5s or 23s, 2 + 3 = 5, naturally. A number also held sacred by certain Discordian sects like the ancient illuminated seers of Bavaria. You will undoubtedly find them everywhere. This is the genius of the Law of Fives. It's not necessarily about whether the universe has an actual numerological obsession with the number 5. It's a practical, do-it-yourself experiment in what some of us like to call guerrilla epistemology. It's a tool for demonstrating, in your own direct experience, how the act of looking for patterns actively creates patterns in your perception of reality. It reveals the mind's incredible power as a co-creator of its own experience, showing you how your beliefs and expectations literally shape what you see. By consciously playing with this mechanism of confirmation bias, by embracing it with a wink and a nod, you can gain profound insights into the subjective nature of evidence, truth, and the very construction of your personal reality tunnel. It's about learning how you see, not just what you see. Then there's Operation Mind. This is perhaps the most overtly mischievous and potentially disruptive aspect of Discordianism. As described by its proponents, the aim of Operation Mind was to lead people into such a heightened state of bewilderment and confusion that their rigid beliefs would shatter and be replaced by some form of enlightenment. How does one achieve this noble goal? By deliberately propagating hoaxes, spreading disinformation, circulating contradictory narratives, and generally injecting as much creative chaos and absurdity into the cultural bloodstream as possible. Think of it as culture jamming with a metaphysical twist, or situationist detournaments taken to their illogical extreme. The idea is that consensus reality is a fragile construct, maintained by shared beliefs and unexamined assumptions. Operation Mind seeks to playfully sabotage this construct, to lob reality grenades into the machinery of social control, not out of malice, but to shake people awake, to reveal the arbitrariness of their beliefs, and to open up spaces for new, less predictable ways of thinking and being.
It's about making thoughts and ideas and the imagination cut into and modified reality.
Of course, as some have noted, Operation Mind may have been devised to with other people's minds, yet it often ended up mainly with those of its prankster progenitors, a risk inherent in dancing too closely with Eris. This spirit of anarchic individualism finds its ultimate expression in the Discordian doctrine that everyone is a pope. You might even get a little card declaring your papal authority, certifying that you have no authority over you, and by extension, no one else has authority over you either. Discordians often hand these out freely, as the term isn't limited to just them. This isn't just a quirky slogan. It's the logical culmination of a philosophy that deeply distrusts all external claims to absolute truth or hierarchical power. If all reality grids are ultimately provisional, and if belief is a personal choice, even the choice to disbelieve the Principia itself, then no external entity, no guru, no priest, no actual pope can legitimately claim superior spiritual knowledge or the right to dictate your reality. It's a radical democratization of spiritual insight, placing ultimate responsibility and ultimate freedom squarely on the shoulders of the individual. It's a truly individualistic path, paradoxically found within a society of like-minded or delightfully unlike-minded individuals. And this is where the spooky high strangeness often creeps in. When you start playing these games, when you start looking for fives, when you adopt these Arisian perspectives, when you engage in your own little operations mind, reality can sometimes begin to feel responsive. Synchronicities pile up. Improbable coincidences bloom like weird flowers. The lines between the prank and the profound, between the subjective and the objective, can start to blur in unsettling and exhilarating ways. As Greg Hill himself, the atheistic satirist, eventually admitted, if you do this type of thing well enough, it starts to work. He found that the effects of invoking a made-up god like Eris were often indistinguishable from sincerely invoking a proper one. The joke, it seems, can take on a life of its own. The journey of Discordianism from a handful of photocopied manifestos to a persistent, if peculiar, cultural meme owes a great deal to two individuals who were not its founders, but perhaps its most effective and certainly most entertaining evangelists, Robert Anton Wilson and Robert Shea. In the late 1960s, Wilson and Shea were associate editors at Playboy magazine, a rather incongruous perch from which to launch a global conspiracy of enlightenment. Part of their job involved sifting through the magazine's correspondence, much of which apparently consisted of paranoid, rambling letters about all manner of secret societies and world domination plots. One day, Shea reportedly said to Wilson, "You know, we could write a novel about this." And they did. They decided to write a novel based on the premise that all these nuts are right and every single conspiracy they complain about really exists. But there was another layer to this. Wilson, already deeply involved with the Discordian Society, felt that this nascent movement needed some opposition, some grand antagonist to give its struggle a bit more dramatic flair, because, as he put it, the whole idea of it is based on conflict and dialectics. So, they created an opposition within the Discordian Society, which they called the Bavarian Illuminati. For a while, They built up this myth of an epic clandestine war between the Discordians and the Illuminati through various underground newsletters and articles. The result of all this creative ferment was
The Illuminatus Trilogy.
published in 1975. This sprawling, satirical, postmodern, science fiction-influenced, drug, sex, and magic-laden adventure story became a cult classic, and in doing so, it acted as a kind of literary Trojan horse, smuggling Discordian ideas, symbols, and terminology into the wider counterculture and beyond. Suddenly, terms like Fnord, symbols like the golden apple, and characters like the enigmatic anarchist submarine captain Hagbard Celine were part of the cultural lexicon. The books didn't present Discordianism as a religion to be joined, but rather wove its concepts into a vast, entertaining, and mind-bending tapestry of interlocking conspiracies, historical oddities, and philosophical speculation. This indirect approach, much like Operation Mind itself, allowed these Arisian memes to bypass skeptical filters and spread virally, influencing music, like the British band the KLF, who named themselves after a Discordian group in the Trilogy. Games, like Steve Jackson's Illuminati card game, and even early computer hacker subcultures. Robert Anton Wilson himself was more than just a popularizer. His own philosophical outlook was a perfect complement to and an amplification of Discordian thought. Wilson championed what he called model agnosticism. This is the idea that all our beliefs, theories, and worldviews, whether scientific, religious, or political, are just models or maps of reality, not reality itself. No single model is the truth. Some models might be more useful, more elegant, or more fun than others in certain contexts, but none should be elevated to the status of infallible dogma. His goal, as he stated it, was to try to get people into a state of generalized agnosticism. Not agnosticism about God alone, but agnosticism about everything. This provided a sophisticated intellectual framework for Discordianism's playful rejection of certainty, transforming it from what might have been dismissed as a mere prank into a potent tool for epistemological inquiry and the deconstruction of one's own reality tunnels. Wilson showed how the joke could be a very serious instrument for intellectual liberation. And it is here, at the intersection of playful philosophy and the grim realities of the world, that our story takes its most unsettling and, indeed, its most spooky, high-strange turn. This involves the co-founder of Discordianism, Kerry Thornley. As we've seen, Thornley was a creative, iconoclastic figure, but his life became entangled with one of the darkest and most conspiracy-laden events of the 20th century, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. During his time in the U.S. Marine Corps in the late 1950s, Thornley had served with and befriended a young man named Lee Harvey Oswald. More astonishingly, Thornley began writing a novel based on Oswald in February 1962, more than a year and a half before Oswald would be accused of assassinating JFK. This single, improbable fact alone is enough to send shivers down the most skeptical spine. After the assassination, these connections inevitably drew the attention of investigators. Thornley found himself in New Orleans, the same city where Oswald had been active in the months leading up to Dallas. He became a person of interest in District Attorney Jim Garrison's controversial investigation into the assassination, with Garrison even suspecting Thornley of being one of the notorious Oswald doubles, individuals reportedly impersonating Oswald as part of a wider conspiracy. While Thornley initially denied any involvement and was ultimately exonerated of any direct role, the experience and the sheer weight of these bizarre coincidences took a heavy toll. According to Adam Gorightly, who has researched Thornley's life extensively, Thornley later came to believe that he might have been an unwitting pawn in the assassination plot, manipulated by forces he couldn't comprehend. This is where the playful chaos of Discordianism collides head-on with the deadly serious paranoid universe of real-life covert operations and political murder. The life of Kerry Thornley, co-creator of a religion based on cosmic pranks and the worship of a goddess of confusion, became a narrative far stranger and more terrifying than any fiction he or Greg Hill could have invented. He descended into paranoia, and according to some accounts, schizophrenia, haunted by the very real possibility that the Arisian chaos he had invoked had manifested in his life with devastating consequences. One is reminded of a remark Thornley once made to Hill, as the strange synchronicities of their Discordian adventures began to pile up. You know, if I had realized that all of this was going to come true, I'd have chosen Venus. The Kerry Thornley, Lee Harvey Oswald, JFK assassination nexus stands as a chilling testament to the Discordian worldview. That chaos is not just an abstract philosophical concept, but an active, unpredictable, and sometimes terrifyingly tangible force in human affairs. It suggests that once you truly invite Eris to the party, she might just show up in ways you could never anticipate, blurring the lines between the game and grim reality until they are indistinguishable. And so, we arrive, blinking and perhaps a little disoriented, at the end of our whirlwind tour through the looking-glass world of Discordianism. We've navigated bowling alley epiphanies, deciphered self-destructing scriptures, pondered the profound implications of hot dog buns, and tiptoed through the shadowy intersections of cosmic jokes and alleged presidential assassination plots. The question then inevitably arises, hanging in the air like the scent of Fnord-flavored popcorn. What is Discordianism? Is it an elaborate joke disguised as a religion? A serious religion disguised as an elaborate joke? A philosophical system? A form of social commentary? A psychological operating system for navigating an increasingly absurd world? The most honest, and perhaps the most Discordian answer to that question is a resounding, unequivocal yes. All of the above, and probably a few other things we haven't even thought of yet. Because you see, the human compulsion to neatly categorize, to distinguish definitively between the serious truth and the playful joke, might itself be one of those conceptual grids we impose upon a universe that, quite frankly, may not operate under such tidy distinctions. Eris, one suspects, doesn't particularly care if you're laughing with her or at her, so long as the stagnant waters of certainty are delightfully disturbed. Perhaps the ultimate thesis of Discordianism, and by extension, of this little journey we've taken, is this. In its wholehearted embrace of chaos, its celebration of absurdity, and its relentless, playful irreverence for all sacred cows, Discordianism offers not just a critique of our neatly ordered reality tunnels, but something far more radical. It suggests that this playful chaos might be a more accurate reflection of the fundamental nature of existence itself, a universe that is inherently creative, ceaselessly surprising, endlessly paradoxical, and quite possibly endowed with a truly wicked sense of humor. Greg Hill, the co-founding atheist, came to believe that invoking a made-up god like Eris could lead to a metaphysical trip just as profound and valid as invoking a proper one. The joke, if pursued with sufficient sincerity or insincerity, starts to work. Or then again, maybe it's all just a very, very elaborate shaggy dog story. A cosmic prank pulled by a couple of clever guys from California, amplified by a mischievous writer, and perpetuated by a scattered tribe of delightful weirdos who enjoy a good mind. Perhaps it's all just one giant Fnord, designed to make you question everything you thought you knew, and then question the question in itself. And that, perhaps, is the final mind-blowing punchline. The beauty of Discordianism, its most enduring and liberating gift, is that you get to decide. It doesn't offer a new set of answers to replace the old ones. Instead, it offers a new set of questions, a new way of thinking about thinking, a license to deconstruct your own beliefs and to play in the glorious ruins of absolute certainty. It's an invitation to model agnosticism, to the understanding that all statements are true in some sense, false in some sense, meaningless in some sense. It's an invitation to cognitive liberty. So, go forth. Look for those fives. Question those authorities. Partake, or don't partake, of those hot dog buns as your own inner pope dictates. And remember, just because it's funny doesn't mean it isn't serious. And just because it's serious doesn't mean you can't laugh at it. Hail Eris! All hail Discordia!